Hello to anyone who is watching this. I'm sitting down here at Claysbrook on a Sunday morning. I've just finished my Qigong practice, and Qigong is the topic I want to talk about. I've just done about 70 minutes worth of practice. It basically encompasses 8 different forms, 7 of which come from a tradition called dayan, spelled D-A-Y-A-N, one word, which means bar-headed goose, and gung, which probably has many meanings, but one of the meanings is cultivation or practice. So basically, 7 of the forms are dayan, and the other one is from a tradition called eagle claw. And so in most of the practice, it's about cultivating some aspect of dayan, the wild goose, the bar-headed goose. Just out of interest, the bar-headed goose is a bird that lives between the west of China and India, and it migrates every year across the Himalayas and is on record as one of the highest flying birds ever seen. It's been apparently spotted at heights of 25,000 feet, so a pretty magnificent creature in that regard, really, to be able to make a journey like that. Anyway, so I have quite a long history with dayan, and I might talk a little bit about that as well. I first encountered dayan when I was in China in 2002. I'd gone to China for 3 months after finishing my traditional Chinese medicine course, which I did at the Perth Academy of Natural Therapies, which no longer exists. But it was a good course where we came out knowing something of both acupuncture and Chinese herbs and a little of tuina or massage, but not very much really. Anyway, so having finished my course, I was interested to go to China and see how it worked in the setting in which it had originally arisen. Just taking a backward step, one of the big reasons why I studied Chinese medicine in the first place was probably tied back to when I trained as a nurse in the UK. I started my training there in 1986, and as soon as I stepped onto the wards as a student nurse during my first placement, because I did hospital-based training, so after 6 or 8 weeks in college we were out on the wards being used as part of the nursing staff, which was quite an experience, being chucked in at the deep end in some ways. But as soon as I walked onto the wards, I was just struck by the sense of there has to be more to health and healing than what goes on here. And no disrespect to many of the advances that Western medicine has made, but it's not the whole picture. It tends to intervene later in the picture, often when people are dealing with really severe ill health. Anyway, so that was certainly part of the motivation, but also, as I mentioned in, I think, the first video I loaded up on TikTok, when I was a kid, when asked what I wanted to be when I grew up, this was aged 5 or 6, my answer was a witch doctor. And I suppose that answer suggests that even as a kid there was some kind of an interest in these more fringe areas of the world, of life. Why I would say that then, I do not know, but that's what I was told I said. So maybe that was also part, the sense of tapping into a completely different way of working with the human body and mind to deal with disease and to promote health. I guess I had a vague interest in China, and having been interested in history and read a fair amount, I did have a sense that China had this very ancient culture and had contributed a great deal to the world in culturally and technologically and philosophically in different ways. I had a vague sense of that. Anyway, so these were all part of the reason why I decided to go over there. There were kind of more personal reasons. I was in the process of coming out of a relationship and selling a house we had bought together, and it just seemed like a good time to do it then. So I did it in a fairly rushed fashion. And with the benefit of hindsight, I wish I'd thought about it a bit more and planned it a bit better, because I could have got so much more than I did get out of that trip. But anyway, one of the things I got out of that trip, which was amazing, was starting to learn dayan gong. I met this British guy, Chris, and he had met this fella, Mr. Yu, this local in the city of Hangzhou where I was studying or doing this placement in the hospital. And Mr. Yu was going to teach Chris Qigong, and I was invited to join the lesson. So I went along, and probably for, I don't know, 7 weeks of my 3-month stay, every morning I'd cycle down to the famed West Lake, or Shihu, in Hangzhou, and join Mr. Yu and another fellow who I think was also called Mr. Yu, who was sort of the translator, and Chris, and we would do our learning, our practice. And this took place amidst thousands of locals who were doing Tai Chi, Qigong, boxing, other martial arts, stretching, dancing, jiggling around weirdly. Just, it was a fascinating and amazing place to be and observe the locals pursuing their various interests, and just the way everybody managed to coexist at very close quarters pretty easily, unlike maybe in Perth, where we can often be quite precious about personal space because we have such a lot of it. But here there were people doing all manner of activities at very close quarters, just in their own little bubble, and getting on with it and sort of skillfully weaving in and out of all the other assembled people there. It was something to behold. Anyway, it just so happened that Mr. Yu was going to teach us dayan gong, or at least he taught us the first 64. I forget the Chinese name of the form right now, but it's one of the most basic forms of dayan gong, and between the first and second 64 is meant to provide a pretty comprehensive workout for the various meridians of the body. For dayan gong is very much rooted in traditional Chinese medicine theory, particularly the theory of acupuncture channels and points. But anyway, going back to Mr. Yu, he was just such a great character. There, amidst all these Tai Chi teachers in their flowing silken robes, looking very earnest and guru-like, was our teacher, this very nondescript fellow, probably in his 60s, wearing his short pants and long socks and collared cotton shirt, and chain smoking all through the practice, which I particularly enjoyed. I just loved that aspect of it. He had got into the practice because he was having some health problems, and he said that basically the practice had helped him resolve those problems. Hopefully the ongoing cigarette smoking didn't give him problems further down the track, but who can say. Anyway, so we learnt the first 64 there, and then before I knew it, I was heading back to Perth and just continuing my life. And for a while I did practice the first 64, but I just kind of felt a bit lost with it, because I mean, dayan gong comes out of this broader tradition of movement-based, meditative, health-promoting practices called qigong, which are part of a larger body, sometimes known as tai chi qigong. People are often more familiar with the idea of tai chi. But anyway, the qi and the qigong part was partly what I was after. I did enter the whole enterprise of learning dayan gong with the unspoken assumption that somehow it would expose me to mysterious realms of existence, connect me with the qi. But when I got back to Perth, I found I was just sort of kind of going through the motions, and after a while other things got in the way. I split up with my partner, moved out, lived with a friend for a while, bought my own house. I went through a bit of a difficult patch, and at some stage I stopped practicing dayan gong. Anyway, a few years later, in 2009, I heard that a fellow called Darren, who had gone to the same college as me, though he was a year or two after me, was going to run some qigong classes in Perth. And I knew him vaguely, I didn't know him well, but anyway, I joined these classes, and I think that was when I discovered that Darren, who had basically gone over to China a couple of years after me, he had ended up marrying a Chinese woman and living in China, and happened to have bumped into some other dayan gong practitioners. One of the, in fact, he met the lineage holder, whose name was, well, the first was Young Mei Jun. She was a woman who was the lineage holder. She died at the age of 106 apparently, and then her son took over the lineage. He was a guy called Chen Shuang Gung. Anyway, I've never met these fellows, but Darren has certainly talked about them both on various occasions. Anyway, so he had learnt dayan gong in Hangzhou, and this came on the back of him having started Tai Chi and various martial arts during his early teens, and so he had a much deeper, broader foundation in these sorts of practices which come out of Chinese culture. Anyway, so I joined the classes, and they went on for about 18 months. And during the course of that, we relearnt the first 64, which I'd learnt in Hangzhou. And then we learnt the second 64, and the two really can stand together, so you can do them as a non-stop sequence which lasts about 20 minutes. And then we learnt a form called Sansha, or triple spiral cross, which takes probably about 8 or 9 minutes to do. Anyway, Darren was over in Perth with his son. His wife was still over in Hangzhou. She had apparently, there was some plan for her to join him, but it never happened. So in 2010, he went back to China, and I was left with what I'd learnt, and I started practicing it fairly regularly, probably 2-3 times a week, pretty consistently for many years. During those years, I did try and contact Darren in various ways, but never managed to track him down. He was lost in the depths of the Middle Kingdom. But I continued with my practice, but like before, I did feel a bit like I was going through the motions. However, I did keep it up for the next 10 years, and that was probably because at this stage I was a qualified and registered acupuncturist. I was doing a bit of acupuncture. I'd always had this notion of becoming a real amazing Chinese medicine practitioner, but I wasn't. I was a bit of a dabbler. I had a little clinic for a while, but I never put much effort into it, and that was partly because I was busy with other sorts of work, firstly in nursing and then in counselling. which got in the way, but also they got in a way which regularly and reliably paid the bills, because starting up your own clinic it's quite a challenging option, and I take my hat off to all my colleagues from college who managed to make that transition and make a good living out of it. Anyway, so I just mentioned this all because that was part of the background of why I continued with the dayan gong, because it represented some link with all the effort and investment I had made in Chinese medicine. But also there was this awareness that it did come out of this amazing, ancient, rich, complex, multifaceted culture, and this just deep belief that there might be more to it than what I was actually getting out of it. And anyway, so for 10 years I continued my practice, feeling a bit lost, but doing it nevertheless, along with various other forms of exercise, until 2020, when out of the blue Darren contacted me on Facebook, and in the course of having a little chat, it emerged that he had got stuck in Perth with his son. His wife and daughter were still back in Hangzhou. He had got stranded here because of the pandemic. And he was, I guess, interested to discover that I was still doing dayan gong, because his experience from teaching people was that most people they may learn to do the forms, but once they've learned it, it's very much, from his perspective, okay, what's next? Let's see what else I can do. Anyway, so I guess he was interested in the fact that I was still practicing it, and in around, I don't know, June, July 2020, we met up, and that's when I guess phase 3 started. Phase 1 would have been that first period in Hangzhou, and then the immediate aftermath when I came back to Perth. Phase 2 would be after learning with Darren in 2009, 2010. Phase 3 kicked in 2020, because within a month or two I decided to commit to a daily practice. And since, I don't know, August, September 2020, I have pretty much maintained that. The only time I didn't practice on a day was the day after I broke my foot rather badly in Tasmania in March, and that was pretty much it. I mean, even then, after that, initially it was misdiagnosed, and I was told I didn't have any broken bones, so I was very painfully doing some practice that was manageable. Some of it I just couldn't do because there's jumps and stuff like that, which I could not do. But then when it was eventually properly diagnosed, for a number of months I did what I could sitting down, with Darren's encouragement, because he really thought it was very worthwhile continuing with the practice. And as I gradually got through my recovery, basically got into kind of doing it standing, very hesitantly and hobbly, but over time, I would say from around July last year, I have used Qigong as part of my rehab apart from anything else. Slight change of position because some people have arrived, a dad with his kids to do some fishing, so I'll give them a bit of space and I'll get out of earshot of them. Anyway, as I was saying, one of the many benefits I think of the Qigong was during this recent process of recovery and rehab from the injury. I'm not completely recovered yet. I don't know if I ever will. I've lost some flexibility in my foot, but and it's a bit uncomfortable at times, but it's much better than it was. But it was a very useful way of assisting that rehab process, and also of acting as some kind of a marker for my progress, because there are so many different, subtle, complex, weird kind of movements, some involving balance, there's a few jumps, twisting and turning and all the rest of it. And over time I could see how I went from being unable to do virtually any of them. I was mainly focusing on the arm and hand movements to gradually increasing my competence in an ability to do these other movements that are all part of the practice. Anyway, so yeah, as I say, I reconnected with Darren in 2020 and have pretty much committed to a daily practice ever since. And currently I do at least 70 minutes, I would say, in the morning. As much as possible, I do it as early as possible, and particularly in summer in Perth because it gets so hot. And when I'm working, because I work shifts, when I'm working a late shift, I will often go and do half an hour of Qigong in the afternoon, because where I work there's a nice little garden, and I go and do it there as well. So it's just become an integral part of my life. Now, why have I kind of continued to do it? Well, I guess the big change has been this third phase and reconnecting with Darren, because we still get together sometimes weekly, every couple of weeks, particularly in summer, and we meet down here at Claysbrook in this spot. Usually, occasionally we meet elsewhere. In winter it tends to be less. But basically I really enjoy practicing with Darren, and in the course of our practice we've expanded when I connected with him, we first went back over the first and second 64 and Sansha, but we've added these various other forms. Mianzang, which means cotton palm, Wu Xing, which is 5 elements, I think, and dayan, I'm not sure what that means, plus a few more stretch-based exercises, Pai Da, Qi Xing, and Eagle Claw. Eagle Claw is the one that comes from a different tradition. Anyway, so yeah, we've expanded the number of forms that I've learnt, and it's an ongoing process of kind of constant refinement. So we practice together, but he picks up on little things where I'm kind of out, because it's all about being as precise as possible, bringing points into alignment with points and channels and all the rest of it. And I have the opportunity to ask questions when I'm uncertain of things. But above all else, what has really motivated me to keep going is that probably, I don't know, a year, 18 months after reconnecting with him, I started to feel the Qi. I guess that was always part of my goal. It was like the sense that Qigong was going to connect me with these mysterious, intangible realms encompassed in the word Qi, that mysterious phrase that most of us have heard but really have no idea what it means, and it means so many different things. I'm just going to shut up while the boat comes past. So as I was saying, yes, gradually out of this practice has emerged this weird, mysterious sensation that is very difficult to describe, but is undeniable. And I'm not even going to bother trying to describe it. It's just a sensation. But for me, it is a very clear and undeniable marker that something is emerging out of this practice. I mean, it hasn't given me any supernatural powers. I can't levitate or read people's minds. Well, no more than I could beforehand. But I think if you're a good observer of people, often you get a good sense of what's going on inside of them as well. But that's a bit of a digression. It's just this sensation, and that sensation is slowly building. And so that has become another significant reason to continue, because something is emerging out of it. But also beyond that, I would say that I do believe it has helped me health-wise, and in particular from around, I don't know, 2014, 2013, I started to get sinus headaches. I'd never been a very headachy person, but gradually I started to get these headaches that would set in for 3-4 days. I would just feel a bit off colour, not terrible, but just not right. Nothing would really get rid of them, no painkillers. It's just this horrible, yucky kind of feeling in the head. And over the years, through 2014, 2015, 2016, and so on, they kind of gradually became more frequent till they were happening maybe every 6 weeks, pretty regularly. I have noticed that over the last 2, 3, 4 years, this period of committing to daily dayan gun practice, they have hugely reduced. I mean, I still occasionally get them, but they don't last as long, and they are much, much less frequent. So I do believe that the qigong, the dayan gun, might be helping with that. But apart from that, what I really like about it is that it gets me out into the world every day. I mean, I'm a reasonably active old fart for a 65-year-old. I love cycling around, I do my swimming, I do my exercise, but I always try to do my qigong outside. And this is my favourite spot down at Claysbrook. It's not the only spot I practice. There are other places along the river closer to me. I practice outside of the Oasis. And the other iconic spot I love is Cottesloe Civic Centre Gardens, which if you're a Perthling and you've never visited there, then that is something I encourage you to rectify. But yeah, it gets me out into the world, connects you with nature. You notice how the path of the sun changes through the year from seasons to season. You see all the birds and various critters around. You see the people, the passing parade. I've had some really fascinating meetings with people down here and elsewhere. It just really kind of connects you more with the world. And in some ways, the practice is very much about connecting with this world that we live in. I'm not going to say too much about it now because this has gone on a while, but many of the movements are essentially about connecting with the earth below and the heavens above. Two of a fundamental kind of yin and yang pairing, a fundamental sort of dichotomy in this life that we lead. We live on this very solid earth, and above us are the vast kind of heavens. And in many of the movements in Dayan Gung, one is kind of, I guess, reaching into the earth and reaching into the heavens. And on that rather weird note, well, hopefully it doesn't sound too weird, I will end this. I will probably return to it, but yeah, I really enjoy my practice. Not every day, not in the middle of winter when it's cold and wet necessarily, though I'm very lucky to have a undercover spot near to where I live, right next to the river. By some mysterious and fortuitous coincidence, the universe has contrived that there is this spot I can practice all year round. You know, I'm not equally enthusiastic every day. Sometimes it does feel like a bit of a chore, but like most exercise, one virtually always feels better after doing it than before, unless you've completely knackered yourself. Anyway, I can blather on interminably, but I will shut up and hop on my bike and head home, and hope that has in some ways given you an idea of what Qigong can offer. I will almost certainly return to the topic, but for the time being, over and out. May the Qi be with you.